They're shorter sessions. If it looks like I'm looking off into space, it's because I have my chat and my video open on the other screen, and I want to see you guys, and I want to see, and gals, I should say, and I want to see what's going on in the chat. So I'm going to keep that open. If you're just joining, feel free to welcome yourself and introduce yourself into the chat box. I'd love to know who's here. I've got Rita and Tracy are our facilitators today, and they'll keep me in line and on track and probably moderate and answer questions as they come up. I know one of the typical questions is, where the heck are the handouts? Where can I get all this information? So I just wanted to share my Event Mobi screen, and all of our information is there. And under documents, you'll see the my PDF of the presentation today. So you'll have that. And then under link is where you'll find the credential briefs that I'm going to go over. So you should have everything you need there. So I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint, swap screens, and say good morning. So good morning. Thanks for joining this session on the credential briefs for inclusive post-secondary education programs. My name is Danny Roberts-Dom, and I work for Project 10, Transition Education Network, as co-director. And today, though, I also work on another grant called You Matter, which is an inclusive post-secondary program at the University of South Florida, St. Pete. And that's kind of the work that we're talking about today are the inclusive post-secondary programs. So that's the hat I'm wearing today, and you can see that in my background too. And yeah, I'm just keeping track of who's here. So good. Thanks for introducing yourselves in the chat. So I just want to first start off. So we're all on the same page about what inclusive post-secondary education means. Basically, there are programs that provide access to people with intellectual disabilities to college. And so it's called inclusive higher ed, inclusive post-secondary ed. You might have heard of TIPSID programs. The Florida Center for Students with Unique Abilities supports these type of programs. Higher Ed Opportunity Act, put the legislation together to facilitate these programs. So just kind of orienting you to what I'm talking about here. Particularly within this, we're going to talk about what are students earning, and if you're a new program or thinking of starting a program, what can students earn in terms of a credential? So there's been a shift. So the Higher Ed Opportunity Act of 2008 really opened the door for these programs. And so the focus was on getting the students on the college campuses. So, having that social immersion, self-reliance, and soft skills and jobs. Those were sort of the focus areas of the first 10 years of this. And that's a lot. I'm not discounting that, because just getting a program open, getting students on campus is huge and hard. It's hard work. But now that we've been doing this work for a while, we're also trying to focus on what are students leaving with. So just like a typical student going to college, and I say college, that could be a university, that could be a state college, a community college, a career and technical center, any kind of post-secondary education. So typically students are earning a bachelor's degree, an associate's degree, a certificate, industry certification, things like that. So what are our students with intellectual disabilities earning? So now there's that focus on accountability, high expectations, content focus, academic or technical skill content focus, and that it's relevant to employers. So there's been sort of this shift, because we've been doing this. I still think it's kind of a new initiative. 2008 doesn't seem that long ago, but I guess it is. So, we're moving forward. So these are some of the credential types we're seeing in these types of programs. And I guess I should also just back up if you're kind of new or not really immersed in inclusive higher ed. So typically students wouldn't be able to access particularly a university because of their diploma type, their high school diploma type, because of the coursework that they took, being on access points or something like that. So their students typically are not degree seeking. So we're not seeing bachelor's degrees or associate's degrees. So just to sort of just monitoring the chat, but I'm going to close that because I keep getting distracted. Just to sort of orient you to what we're talking about. So these are some of the credential types that we are seeing though. So certificates of completion, certificates for college and career readiness. Typically these two things are awarded by the program. So like for our program, it's called You Matter. It's at the University of South Florida. But if my program was giving one of the two first certificates, it's coming from the You Matter program, not from USF. And that makes a difference. Anyone can print a certificate off on their printer. So what does it mean? What does it mean to employers? What does it mean for the student when they're completing this credential? There's industry credentials. So those are created by different industry groups, usually organizations, and those sort of translate. They're kind of sector and industry specific. There's also continuing education credentials. A lot of higher ed programs or higher ed colleges, universities, state colleges, they have a continuing ed department where you can get smaller credentials like Microsoft Word certification, Adobe Photoshop, and some more in depth than that too. Those are just a few that I've personally taken over the years. And then college employment credentials. So that's another one that's sort of specific to a program. All right, so what is a credential? I keep saying credential, credential, credential. So this is just a definition we pulled from some leaders in this. Can't think of her name. Dr. Shanley is what I call her. Kate Weir and Meg Riegel are sort of leaders in this field. So credential is a verification of a qualification or competency issued to a student by an accredited institution of higher education. So that's typically diploma, certificate, or a degree. And it's earned by following and completing a prescribed course of study. So these are some things we're going to be talking about today. What are the ending credentials and how do students get them through their course of study? I should also probably back up and just tell you a little bit more about the Florida Consortium on Inclusive Higher Education, which made these credential briefs and why we did that. And actually to do that, I'm going to just take you to the credential briefs. Again, the link is in your event Mobi. If you click the credential brief links, it'll take you right here to the Florida Consortium on Inclusive Higher Ed. I will tell you, we were a TIPSIT, a transition and post-secondary program for students with intellectual disability model demonstration site in Florida from 2010 to 2020. And our last 5 years was under the Florida Consortium, and we basically provided training and technical assistance and mini grants to start inclusive post-secondary programs. It was a grant, the grant did end, but the website is still up. I believe it's up through July, so you might want to download these briefs because this website will have to go bye-bye soon. So let's see, you can see everybody that was on the steering committee for this project, and all 6 of the credential briefs are right here for you. What else do I want to say about that? I'll start with credential brief 1 is just sort of background on inclusive post-secondary ed. So if you're new to this, if some of the things I'm saying are like, go here, start with number 1. It gives you a really good background on a federal picture, national picture of what inclusive post-secondary ed is, and a state picture, because we have a lot of amazing things going on in Florida. If you were in the transition contacts meeting, Wendy Meddy talked a little bit about this. The Florida Center talked about this. We are number 2 in the state for the our state is number 2 in the nation for these programs. And so it talks about why that is and all of that. So I'm just sort of scrolling slowly through so you can see what these programs are. And you can see here the Florida context and all we've been doing and all of that. The other cool thing, sorry to scroll kind of quickly. acronyms, terms, and resources. So, we're acronym crazy in education, and particularly special education. And inclusive post-secondary education has its own level of acronyms. So this is a go-to. It's at the end of each one of these briefs. And that will be helpful to you to have that. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. So our consortium was tasked, we tasked ourselves when we wrote the grant. We were very ambitious to make a statewide credential. We pulled all kinds of people together at the state level and that were doing the work at programs and tried our best to see how could we make this happen, a statewide credential for these programs. We quickly found out that every program is very different. Every institution of higher education is very different in what their offerings are. So we decided the next best thing is to put together some briefs on, guidance for what you need to know about choosing a credential or creating a credential. And so that's what these 6 briefs are. We didn't just dream this up, we used the national leaders in inclusive post-secondary ed. So that's Think College, they're our go-to, they're our national coordinating center. They already had an action planning tool for credentialing, but we're Florida, we've got to kind of make it our own. So we created something modified off of that, but Florida specific to our context. So that's in one of the later appendices in the credential briefs. I'll talk about that at the end. But we also looked at competencies for career readiness. So we used the National Association of Colleges and Employers framework for that. We also looked at credential stacking. And with that, from the, I think it's the Lumina Foundation. So that's the Connecting Credentials and the Beta Credentials framework. So we looked around a lot. Okay, I already mentioned we have 6 of them. These are how they're kind of broken down. We already went through the background of inclusive post-secondary ed. Today, we're going to focus mostly on programs of study and exploring existing credentials. The partnerships, number 4 is awesome. Number 5 is that credential action planning tool. So it's not information heavy. It's literally a chart that you can use in your program or, just if you're starting out using, as a planning tool. And then number 6 is all the resources that we found on this topic and that maybe you would want to check out. And so there's a link too, but it's an event movie. So like I said, today we're going to start with 2 and 3. Okay, so Credential Brief 2 is about programs of study, and the breakdown is as listed on this slide. So it talks about, it's really guidance for existing and beginning programs. So it talks about what elements should you have on your website or in your brochures to describe your program. So those descriptive elements so that people, students and potential students and families know, what this program is and is not. The summary program overview, eligibility, so that there's some important factors there. Satisfactory academic progress, that's SAP. The advising structure of a program and the types of program of study that students are working towards, and those programs of study components. So what is a program of study? You can see the definition here, and this is something we sort of defined for ourselves during our work with the Florida Consortium. Kathy Becht was our director. You might be familiar with her. Now she works for Think College. But anyway, program of study, it's a comprehensive structured framework of academic coursework and co-curricular activities and expectations leading towards a credential. So it kind of is the culmination of everything that a student is engaging in to achieve that credential. So that includes the career education, social, independent living components, etc. So it's not just the coursework. And I think what I'm going to do, instead of these slides, I'm going to just sort of walk you through Credential Brief 2. Sorry for the scrolling. I'm going to make it just a hair bigger. Just so you know, it looks really wordy. The first page on all these are pretty much the same. It talks about, who these are intended for and so on and so forth. Gives a little bit of background about why we did this. So the programs of study type in our work, sort of working with all the inclusive post-secondary programs in Florida, we identified 3 different types of programs of study. We tried to sort of categorize programs, even though every program's kind of different, there's some similarities. So the first one is a liberal arts program of study. And you can see kind of bullet points. Program length is typically 2 to 4 years. The academic paths are individualized and limited only by programs available within the institution. The coursework is primarily academic inclusive courses. So what an academically inclusive course is a program, is a course that's in the typical course registry, that a typical student would take. So yeah, that's kind of in short what it is. If you see academically specialized, that means that's a course just for students with intellectual disability in that particular program. Those are 2 different things. Number of courses taken per semester ranges from 1 to 3, and a few students might take 4. Additional requirements could include a number of co-curricular activities such as service learning, volunteering, mentoring, tutoring, online curriculum, employment, all kinds of things. The credit type, students are usually auditing, but they might receive credit. And these are typically at universities, so you see the credit hour terminology versus you'll see in a later program of study type, you would see like clock hours. That's usually at a career and technical program. And then the credential types they get include, they're non-degree seeking students typically, the general certificate of completion awarded by the program, not the institution. They might be working towards industry badges or industry or employment focused credentials. And as I said, this liberal arts sort of program of study type typically at universities. And we're a smaller group, so as there are questions and stuff, put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask them. And I know I talk fast, so I'm sorry in advance for that. Okay, we're going to move on to career and technical education program of study. So here, kind of just going to go through those bullet points too. Program length, much shorter, 1 to 2 years. The academic paths vary depending on what's offered by the particular institution the program's at. Coursework is primarily academic inclusive courses. So again, those typical courses that are available to all students. The number of courses per semester, it depends on what program the student is pursuing, like whether it's auto mechanic or cosmetology or something like that. Some of the programs might include a Florida Department of Education post-secondary ed course as a mechanism, and you'll see that we have an example later with the Florida Department of Children's and Families. The child care certificate has statewide specifics from the Department of Ed. And then, and here are some sample areas: nursing assistant, auto collision repair, child care, facial specialty, massage therapy, etc. Some programs require students to participate in workshops or online modules to work on skills that are not specific to the program they're pursuing, things like life skills, communication, tutoring, social activities, etc. And the real big difference here is that typically students are taking credit bearing or clock hour courses. So they're not auditing like they might be with the liberal arts programs. Credential types are often non-degree seeking, certificate of program completion, and or industry certification, and then those discrete certificates. And students might be able to obtain more than one industry type certification. And here are just some examples. The industry design professional certifications include things like welding, auto body repair, childcare, Microsoft Adobe and ServeSafe. And then those discrete certificates can be earned in a much shorter time, and they might be things like CPR and ServeSafe. These are the CTE programs of study are typically at state colleges and technical colleges. And then finally, the last program of study type is the transitional. And so this one's pretty unique. It's also about 1 to 2 years in length. The career path is like a general career education or life skills. So it's a combination of academic, career education, and social skills. It includes things like developmental academic skills, soft skills, and self-advocacy. One change here is that the coursework is in primarily academically specialized courses. So that's a change from courses that are on a typical, the name is like totally escaping me, but like when you look up your course lookup on the registrar's website, they're not listed there necessarily. But the students also take some audited courses and academically inclusive courses. The whole part, the whole rationale of getting students access, students with intellectual disability access to these programs is to be included in college. So we want to make sure that students are taking academically inclusive courses too. So in addition to the coursework, so additional requirements can include employment, tutoring, social activities, and then of course taking those academically specialized courses. The credit type could be credit bearing or non-credit bearing, and the credit bearing would be for the academically specialized courses. Credential type is could be a lot of things: non-degree seeking, career education workforce certificate, or a certificate of program completion. So there are 3 credentials established and used at one university called the Certificate of Supported Employment, Supported Community Living, and Supported Community Access. So those are available. And this type of program, a transitional program, is typically at a university or a state college. So I'm going to jump back to my PowerPoint and see. I think I covered a lot that's on these slides, and I just kind of took you into the brief, but let's just see. Okay, so just to recap, we've got those 3 types of programs of study. That's what I just went through. So let me just show you a example of each of these, like what it would actually look like if you pulled up their program brochure. And so let me just check my time. Doing okay. The liberal arts program of study, this one is from a university. The program of study focus area is hospitality. So professional services, hospitality. And this is just some of the course listings. So you can see what they're graded for, what the semesters look like, the total credit units. This program goes by credit unit, not necessarily credit hour. The AH means audited. The CU is credit units. So you can see what's required and what is an elective. And then over here, you can see what is academically inclusive is AI and academically specialized is AS. So it's sort of a balance of academically inclusive and some academically specialized. So I'm going to show you a CTE example. This is at a state college that also has a CTE component. So it's kind of, I don't want to say it's unique, but just to let you know, there's baccalaureate programs at state colleges, and then there's CTE programs and shorter credentials at state colleges. So this is one of those CTE shorter credentials. This is the childcare credential. And so remember, this is one that has statewide components through the Department of Children and Families. So this takes up to 1 year. You can see the RH under credit type is required hours. So this program is, and many programs that are career and technical are by hours, not credits. You can see that these are all academically inclusive and they're all required. There is a certification, several exams required too. And this is what it also requires an internship, or 2 internships actually. And then the co-curricular course information are those supports that are provided by an inclusive program. So it's not just the students going through the typical curriculum like any student, but they're also getting other supports. They're being engaged in campus, they're going to tutoring, they're getting some other guidance and support. And then the transitional example, you can see it's 2 years. You can see the courses that they're taking. These SLS courses are vetted through the state. They are inclusive, although many times, it is people with disabilities taking them. Not always, but oftentimes. You can see a lot of options. Yeah.
We have a question in the chat. Is the student responsible for getting their own internship?
That's a good question. For that particular program, with the childcare, I'm not sure. I think that's actually part of the coursework and part of, the program. But in general, like with the transitional type or the liberal arts type, typically they're assisted with that. A program director, program coordinator will be doing person-centered planning with that student to find out what their career goals are. And that's ongoing because that changes a lot, especially at the beginning towards, the first semester. So they help seek out those internship opportunities. Typically, well, I won't say typically, like in my program, students will intern on campus first, just to kind of get their bearings, get a really good grasp on campus, get known on campus. And then maybe in their second year, they'll be going off campus for some internships. And we usually programs have somebody that's sort of like an employment specialist, job coach, kind of really in tune to the employment and internship opportunities out there, and they'll help with that placement. Okay, so going on to the, and I think I have 15 minutes left. Going on to the third credential brief, this one really talks about what credentials are already out there being used. And so we've already given a couple examples, but we actually have surveyed programs and they've shared what credentials they're using. And so these are a summary and where you can find them within the credentials. I'll just share some of the examples. I think there's more in the actual credential brief 3, but I'll just talk about a few of them. So this one's an industry credential, and it's by the National Retail Federation, Customer Service and Sales. This one I'm pretty sure is used at the Florida Keys Community College, and it's one that we're interested in doing at USF St. Petersburg campus program. Because it's pretty general and many of our students go into customer service. And so this is what it looks like. You can see the required coursework, the activities that the students also engage in, and then the supports they get. And this is an example, like I said, from the Florida Keys. And the exam and everything is done through the actual industry, the National Retail Federation. At Florida State College at Jacksonville, their vertical program, students can take almost, well, I won't say any credential available to any typical or any student, but many. But Denise put together the ones that are most frequently used by the students with intellectual disabilities, and you can see there's quite a lot. So, the HVAC, the air conditioning piece, commercial foods, culinary, cosmetology, facial specialty, office assistant, the list goes on and on. This talks a little bit about the minor certifications available through adult and continuing ed programs. So a lot of times these are things such as really shorter credentials like CPR, first aid, and red carpet customer. But they still are very important in industries. Whoops, sorry. And so there are some questions to consider when connecting with your adult or continuing ed here too, just some considerations, because it can be a great avenue to get a credential going. This is just some guidance for if you're a program starting out, or even if you're not just starting out, you've been around for a while, and you want to really be more focused on what the ending credentials that students are able to access are, these are some things to do. So exploring those types. So what's out there now, you know, taking a look at Credential Brief 3, which has a lot of those examples. Looking at the credentialing bodies. So like that National Retail Federation, there's others like that too, that pretty much hold that industry certification for different areas. Another thing you'll want to do is look at your local labor market and see what's in demand in your area. Also look at your school, your Institute of Higher Ed. What are the strengths? What are the program areas and offerings they already have? And then also connecting with local employers and agencies via our Career Source are really great, resources of information, kind of going back to that labor market. And then looking at what offices handle credentialing on your campus. And that kind of gets to this slide. Who are the dancers? So, and I'll say I'm guilty of this. So I created my program with my colleague and wrote the grant, wrote the program of study. I think I know it all. But you've got to talk to people and you've got to collaborate with your campus, because they're the ones that have existing credentials and programs, and there's policy and all kinds of things. So these are just some ideas on campus and in your local community for people you need to talk to and check with and get guidance and ideas from, where you can house a credential or how you can connect to a credential that's already available on your campus. So under academic services, your undergrad studies, continuing ed, adult ed or professional ed. Your registrar is huge. Financial services or financial aid, undergrad admissions to your president and provost offices will be really key too. Also engaging with local employers and community agencies like VR and having them on your advisory board is huge. So I'm not gonna lie, there's some roadblocks out there. There's accreditation issues, although I'm gonna talk about a new resource in just a second. That's really exciting on the national level with accreditation in these programs. Particularly I'll say at universities, undergrads don't earn certificates, and a lot of universities they're not really keen on all these certificates and things. They think of that as more of a state college, community college, tech school focus. But our students aren't earning bachelor's degrees. So how to make it work and marry that. And a lot of times that can result in going down the continuing ed or professional adult ed pathway. And it does take a lot of time and energy to expend and to gather all the information and try to figure out how this works at your particular institution. And also sometimes the person doing that, like me, for instance, I don't have the power to just make it happen if it looks good on paper. So just sort of know those. Okay, this is what I was saying. The National Coordinating Center Think College has actually, this has been in the works for years, but they've actually put out the model program accreditation standards for these programs. So the link is here. This is sort of what it looks like on the first page. So this is huge because it will guide all of these programs towards accreditation, which part of the accreditation is what credentials these programs are having. Accreditation is really important in the higher ed realm. So it's just giving us, I say us, these programs another level of credibility, that these programs are rigorous, they have outcomes, they're leading to meaningful credentials. And yeah, so this is huge. So if you're in this inclusive post-secondary world, make sure you have this handy and start reading through it and are aligning your program toward this. This is just a snapshot of Credential Brief number 5, which is that action planning tool. Again, it was adapted from the national level from the Think College and just made specific to the Florida context. It'll guide you through kind of every question you need to ask and helps you make a plan for figuring out credentials at your program. And then I just wanted to mention this too. Programs are changing and they're ever evolving and upping their level of rigor for students, which is awesome. It's what we need. And so, there's always this balance of focusing on employment-specific credentials and shorter term credentials so students can get their certificate and then go to work. But we can't lose, liberal arts and giving time for exploration of courses, of electives, of social activities, and sort of that young adult growth that happens during college. So there's always this balance of meaningful credentials and certificates, but also having that space that college is sort of about. And so that's sort of on the other side, the exploration, the high expectations, leading students toward better and long-term employment and sustainability. These are just some of the resources. I want to mention one thing too. I mentioned the Florida Consortia website's going away. It is. Project 10 is pulling over all of the resources that are still relevant and great. And we're going to put that under our post-secondary education and training bucket on our website. And it has its own little area called Inclusive Post-Secondary Ed. There's already information there. I don't have everything pulled over yet, but that's where you can find it. And of course, the Florida Center for Students with Unique Abilities has a lot of information too. And I'll sort of end there. I'm going to just put it back up EventMobi because you'll have our information there. Any questions? We've got a little bit of time left. And just a reminder, documents are right here, the PDF and then the credential links. Also, don't forget to do our survey. It's right under session feedback. You click on that, click which session this is, and then fill it out.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation, Danny. Great information to have, great resources.
Yeah.
And we really appreciate it. I don't see any questions at this time. It's just a lot of thank yous and very informative. And
sweet. Well, thank you all so much for joining me this morning. And I hope to see you in the general session in just a few minutes.